why do you need fire size in both tables? You have fire ID in both tables.
I'm getting there.
Sure.
Okay, the second level of normalization is before we could have gotten a unique ID, but our unique ID was in two separate columns. And now with this one, I've added a unique ID to the UCU table because it was lacking one before. And I made it by a combination of the UCU and the fire ID.
So that includes both what fire it is and what UCU it's burning in, so that if one fire is burning in 2 UCUs, then that fire would have 2 UCU fire codes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you know, say if like, say if these were the same fires, but you have different UCU codes. When you combine them, you're still going to get a unique ID because this is different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like a first name and a last name.
Yeah, kind of like that. And it's always good to sign unique IDs that make sense, you know, when possible. But like you pointed out, there is an issue with this table. There is redundancy. So the third order of normalization is fire size should be in its own table with fire and does not need to be repeated in the UCU table. It just takes up wasted space. So there's a fourth level, but it's way confusing.
I guess one of the most confusing things to me about these is that your goal is to make tables that you can use to relate to each other, whereas I'm used to developing a database where all of the response variables and explanatory variables are in the same database so that I can run my analyses, and the goal is to basically just explain variation and conduct tests. So what kinds of questions, I guess, are you answering? Can you just give me an example of some of the types of questions that you're answering with these types of data?
Well, like say for this, we had another table where we had UCU, year, and number of hunters. So say you were interested in, say, if fire size explains the number of hunters in a UCU. So you would build a query to combine your information about the number of hunters in a UCU and then a query to combine the fire size. You know, so you'd use this unique fire ID to pull this column from this table and join it to your hunter UCU table, and then run your analysis on that table. Yeah.
So, can I also give an example here? I did not know that I used it, but I apparently did while entering my data for my master's work. I had 15 different sites where I conducted track plots and bell transects for mammal science. So I had one, this was not in Excel, this was done in SPSS. So I had one table for the estate description. So there were like these 15 sites with 15 IDs and their description, what's the elevation, what's the size, and what's the distance from forest, what's the vegetation composition in each of those sites. And then my table with the data I collected in field, which is like, okay, on any given bell transect, this is the estate ID, and this is the bell transect ID, and this is the number of signs of tiger, number of signs of leopards, number of signs of mongoose and deer, and those kinds of things. So I did not know. I did not even link them really, because I don't think you can do that in SPSS. But when I was running my analysis, then it helped me a lot to get the estate level differences, like with respect to distance from forest, what is the species richness. And the distance was not in my main table, was not in the table where I was recording species richness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, cool. See, you know it already.
No, I just figured that I did it.
Next, how to determine tables.
I could have used it, those fancy words in my thesis.
This is kind of repetitive of the data that can be provided by the user. Reduce redundancy. The table should be limited to the single subject that can maintain the data independently And if you can't, the table can't really figure out a primary key for it, you might want to rethink whether it should be its own table.
So you mean like UCU fire was the primary key for that one?
Yeah, yeah, it was a unique combination. Yeah. Poor naming, the lack of consistency. As far as some people don't use the same name for the same columns. I mean, you can find some really bad data out there. Like, you know, one place they'll call it fire, and the next place, or they'll call it year, and the next place maybe they'll call it YRR, you know, abbreviated, you know, stuff like that.
I did that to myself.
And also, it's helpful to use the same style. So, like in this one, I decided to capitalize the first letter in each word instead of, you know, mixing things up and, underscoring it. So, just be consistent. And it also is good to take notes of what your columns mean so that you can go back to them, or someone not even familiar with the database can understand what the columns are.
Or if you go back to it a year and a half later.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Been there, done that. And like I said, will the names make sense to a future user? There are some programs that have constraints on like path names. So like with ArcGIS, rasters can't be stored in path names that have space in them. So like say you try to store them under My Documents, it's not going to work because there's that space between My Documents. So something to keep in mind.
So that should say spaces.
Yeah, spaces. Yes, it should say spaces. Sorry about that. Also, there can be constraints on names. Like you can't name an ArcGIS grid longer than 13 characters. So also some places spaces aren't allowed in the names, and they automatically put in underscores. SAS does that. Also, like if you try to save a table as a TXT, text tag delimited or whatever, it won't allow you to have spaces in the name. It'll save the table, and you'll think, oh good, I have my data. But you go to like open it up, and it's not going to work. Like I pulled it into like ArcGIS, and it just gives you focus. So it's like, and if you hadn't saved it as a different format, then you only have that text file, then you're in trouble. So I usually try to, when I'm changing data formats, I usually try to change the data format and then open it up with the program that I want to before I delete or close out that original file. So, and just avoid funky characters. Most programs, they don't take that. Some databases do allow aliases, so that can help you better remember what your data is. Like in this is ArcGIS, and it doesn't want spaces, or it can be too long. So in this one, the name is actually lateral, so when you actually export, say, a table, that will be the name. And when you run an analysis, that's what you use. But when you open it up in ArcGIS and are looking at the table, it will have a nicer name to it. So, documentation. Some types of data commonly used have a set method. ArcGIS is one of them. I'll kind of show it to you. It's standard metadata that people are supposed to follow. Some of the minimum documentation that I think a person should have is the author and contact information, the date published and modified, what's the purpose for your database. Also, the stage is important to know if it's going to be updated or changed. When I download other people's data, it's nice to know if it is actually completed or not. And the definitions of the tables, columns, relationships, and any constraints. This data should not be used for such and such. Profit, yeah. I find it's a good idea if you have a worksheet specifically devoted to your data. Say if you use an Excel and just call it metadata down on the little bottom tab there. I find that that's a very wise idea. And it might also be good, people like the first column in your database, if it's not one that you're running through a statistical program, it's good to maybe acknowledge where the data came from. Say you have a worksheet in Excel and it has like graphs in it and stuff like that. That's obviously not a file that you're going to import into SAS. And on those worksheets, it's nice in that first column to say where the data came from, give credit to people, because I've had data that I've done and been passed around, and people have kind of, well, you didn't say where this data came from.